Before we get into the NBA, NFL, I want to talk about the NBA real quick. Derrick Rose, he announced his retirement after 16 years in the NBA. Sad for me because I don't know if I told y'all this. I'm a diehard Chicago Bulls fan. D Rose being the hometown kid from Chicago, number one overall pick, rookie of the year, three-time All-Star, youngest ever to win the MVP award at age 22. And then unfortunately along the way, injuries came along with Derrick Rose. And at one point, there was either him or Russell Westbrook as far as most athletic point guards in the history of the game. I think D Rose will probably get into the Hall of Fame because he has enough of a resume, a little bit from the NBA. And of course, it's the Basketball Hall of Fame, the Naismith Hall of Fame. So they take everything else into consideration. He was my favorite player other than Allen Iverson. Like growing up, I just loved D Rose. I loved his athleticism, his heart, his energy, the way he represents Chicago. A lot of people were wearing them Adidas, the D Rose sneakers back then too. So love me some D Rose. BRF, I'm gonna let you go first. What are your thoughts about his retirement? Do you believe he should be in the Hall of Fame and more?
I think, and let's see, former MVP, three-time All-Star. I think would it be in if it was the NBA Hall of Fame, I'd probably say no. But would it be in the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame? And you have to take into account what he did in Memphis, even though it was only 1 year. The fact that he got them basically to the national championship game that year, and just there are a lot of players that we like to throw into that what if category. Like your Greg Odens, your Brandon Roys, your Tracy McGrady's, guys like that who had spurts, who had moments, but how great they could have been if not for the injuries that set them back. Could we be potentially talking about Derrick Rose as a top 10 point guard of all time had it not been for the injuries? Me personally, the trajectory he was on, particularly after winning that MVP, he was on his way. He was on his way. And it's not like he really had too many flaws in his game. I mean, he really didn't. I mean, we obviously knew how athletic he was. He had a surprising mid-game. He could shoot it every once in a while. I mean, we know his game was attacking the rim and, driving, setting up teammates, but just like he he had the city of Chicago on his back. Like that year, 2011 when he won the league MVP, and he was starting to really take his game to a whole another level. And then he suffered the ACL injury, and it just seemed like everything just kind of it plateaued after that. And I give that brother credit. He made a career when a lot of other people might have given up. He knew what his body had gone through. He knew what he was probably going to become. Not necessarily, the all-star level caliber point guard that he was early in his career in Chicago, but he carved himself out a really good career as being a solid role player, spot starter. Just he could come in, particularly with like the Minnesota Timberwolves, when he dropped that humongous game to kind of show the world that, hey, you know what? I might not be Memphis Derrick Rose. I might not be Chicago Derrick Rose, but damn it, I'm still Derrick Rose. And when you need me to put a game up, I'm going to put a game up on you because I know this game and I can still play this game. So that was one of those moments that really
That 50-point
kind
game
of
against Utah.
that 50-point game against Utah, it almost really put himself back on the map. Like, no, I'm not the player that I once was, but I'm still really good at this. You know what I'm saying? You give me the ball, I'm gonna get you something. And I know basketball fans around the world when he had that game, they had to be proud of him to see him get back on that, to see him kind of reclaim some of that spotlight. And it just kind of went from there. He just kind of solidified himself into what he ultimately became for the rest of his career. Solid role player, spot start for you every once in a while. Great, I mean, still a great setup man, getting his teammates involved, could still shoot the rock, could still drive. The only thing he really couldn't do, he wasn't the athlete he once was, but he was still a really good basketball player. So I think with it being the Naismith Hall of Fame, I think he's got a shot to get in there, And honestly, just ultimately what I feel he's going to be for the game of basketball. I think he's going to be a great, solid ambassador for this game, for what it's given him and for what he's given to it. Shout out to Derrick Rose because he was definitely one of my favorite players to watch, regardless of whether he was just the athletic freak or just a dude, giving you quality minutes, could still give you 15 to 18 a game, 6-7 assists. I mean, just being that vet for teams like Minnesota, for teams like Cleveland, for teams like the Knicks, to ultimately, being with the Memphis Grizzlies and ultimately retiring, and just shout out to him, man. I mean, he really kind of just,
especially New York too, BRF, because at one point he was in the conversation for 6th Man of the Year back in the 2020, 2021 season.
Yeah, the 2020 season. Oh, most definitely. What he was doing off the bench with the Knicks that year was just, like I said, I mean, it's just you root for brothers like Derrick Rose. You want to try to do things the right way. You root for guys like that. So I'm happy to see him go out on his terms. I'm really happy to see him go out on his terms. I hope he gets into the Naismith Hall of Fame. But you just gotta send a salute to him for everything he's done for the game of basketball, and just brothers like him you root for. So I'm happy to see that man go out on his terms.
Champ, what's your thoughts, man?
Number one, man, I don't think people understand what Derrick Rose meant to the city of Chicago. If you put what he meant to the city of Chicago, put him and LeBron in that same conversation. And in fact, he probably meant more. Because are y'all familiar with the Benjamin Wilson story? There was a guy by the name of Benjamin Wilson. And ironically, I think he played point guard as well. He was in that city and went to the same high school as Derrick Rose, Simeon High. And he was just as talented, if not more. And he was supposed to be everything that Derrick Rose was. Unfortunately, he tragically lost his life. So go back and look at that story, because he was from Chicago as well. But unfortunately, he lost his life. But if you look at that story, that was what Derrick Rose became what Benjamin Wilson was supposed to be had he lived. And when you think about that and put that into context, that's what it meant for the city of Chicago. Like I said, him being from Chicago, people of Chicago knowing the Benjamin Wilson story, people who know that basketball story, and him being drafted there, like I said, it's the equivalent of LeBron getting drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers. Because guess what? He's one of us. We don't have to guess if he's one of us. He's from our city. We've watched him grow up. We've watched him in high school. We watched him in college. And he just went to Memphis on vacation and came right back to his home. That's what that meant to the city of. It's kind of like if you were from the city of Chicago, it's kind of like watching your best friend come back home again. But look up the Benjamin Wilson story, because had he lived, he would have been the first Derrick Rose, especially if he would have got drafted to Chicago. But that's how significant and how much Derrick Rose meant to the city of Chicago. Not only that, man, they were desperately searching for something after the great Michael Jordan retired. And boom, look what happened. One of Chicago's sons, not someone out of town, one of your favorite sons, come back and become the youngest MVP, best record of the league, Now we got a chance to get back on top once again. And had he not got hurt, I believe he would have won multiple championships. He was Derrick Rose, man. Look, it makes me smile because look, man, we're old enough to remember. We're not, we're not new to this. We're true to this. We remember the lyrics. Shout out to Derrick Rose, man. That dude, he was a pop phenomenon, man. He was a pop phenomenon. And when you think about it, before he went out, everyone was saying if there's anyone that was going to dethrone the Miami Heat and the Cleveland Cavaliers, it was going to be Derrick Rose. And I hate that we didn't see that story. As far as the Hall of Fame is concerned, hey, man, I'm going to just be real. We've seen guys with way less credentials make the Basketball Hall of Fame. We've seen guys with way less credentials make the Basketball Hall of Fame. Let's just be clear. And so I think he can make it. And guess what? Like I said, if we was talking about the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is darn near impossible to get into, I mean, you can have 10 Pro Bowls and they'll leave you out for a couple of years. You get left out in the cold for a couple of years. But this is the Basketball Hall of Fame, and it's very, very open. And you got to think about what he meant to the game of basketball. One criteria that I name when I talk about the Hall of Fame is, can history be written without you? And during his time, especially in Chicago, you can't write the history of the NBA without Derrick Rose, especially when you think about, and I give you your flowers on this, PSP, the Rose rights in your contract, much like the bird rights were earlier in the earlier stages of the NBA. You went from having bird rights, now you have Derrick Rose rights in your contract. And him getting those contract terms written into certain contract, now young players have a chance to gain $40 million more. So you can't write the history of the NBA without Derrick Rose. And so I think he has a chance to make it. Like I said, we've seen guys with way less credentials than Derrick Rose making it to the Naismith Pro Basketball Hall of Fame. We've seen guys with way less credentials. I think for what he meant for the game, I think that he will make it, and I think that he can. But, hey, good. I was privileged. And it was an honor to watch Derrick Rose. Like I said, and think about it, what it meant to the city of Chicago. Yeah. Like I said, go look up that story afterward. There's a 30 for 30 on it and everything about Benji Wilson.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Definitely.
Yeah, so that was the first Derrick Rose. And if you can imagine him getting drafted into the NBA, that's what should have happened with Benji Wilson. And I think that's what that meant to the city of Chicago, man. And shout out to the city of Chicago, man. Look, I know that he wasn't able to give y'all a championship, but that team was a very exciting team to watch.
Oh, yeah. Him, Joakim Noah. I mean, and Joakim Noah was a very underrated big man. He was a former, I think he won Defensive Player of the Year at one point. Could play defense, energy, can pass the ball as well too. Thibodeau, I think he won Coach of the Year at that point, the year when Derrick Rose won the league MVP. You know how I look at it with Derrick Rose, how he meant to Chicago, even though he's not from Philadelphia, but Allen Iverson. Because even though Allen Iverson didn't deliver a championship to the Philadelphia 76ers, still he is revered there because of what he epitomized Philadelphia, heart, warrior, and he's relatable. Like Allen Iverson is like my size, 5'11", $150-ish, soaking wet. But at the same time, he is a heart, a warrior. Takes a beating. I mean, guys like Shaq, LeBron, Wade, and Carmelo. And also with Allen Iverson, he changed the game of basketball, not only on the court but off the court as well. And I think Rose, that's what he meant to Chicago. That's what he meant to a lot of people. And I think that's kind of like with Allen Iverson in Philadelphia, because he gave that city, that town, hope that no matter what, we're going to fight. We're going to continue. We're going to do everything he can. And he was electric and exciting to watch too, just like Allen Iverson. So I think that's kind of like why I said he's like my favorite player outside of Allen Iverson, because he was explosive. He was bigger than Allen Iverson, about 6'1", 6'2", $190-ish. But man, can attack the paint. I mean, he can make any type of acrobatic shot in the paint. I mean, the mid-range game, Derrick Rose was just phenomenal, man. And man, I definitely believe he'll get into the Basketball Hall of Fame because, again, the standards. If this were pro basketball, probably not. But can you tell the story without Derrick Rose? No, you can't. So shout out to D Rose, hell of a player, and well deserving of everything else, man.